Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the potential of offshore wind in France. My name is Megan Farbrother, and I am a Research Director at Green Power Global. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to welcome so many listeners to this afternoon's webinar. We have received over 300 registrations, which is a great testament not only to the excellent speaker who will be presenting today, but also to the importance of the topic area. Please be aware that this session is being recorded and a link will be emailed to you shortly after the webinar is complete, so you will be able to listen again and share with your colleagues. Just to let you know a little bit more about Green Power Global, it was founded more than 15 years ago to accelerate the fight against climate change through creating live events. These are commercial events that focus on connecting senior level decision makers. Together we accelerate projects, spread best practice and de-risk strategic decisions. This webinar is on the potential of offshore wind in France. This year, the French government is setting national targets for the whole of its energy industry, including renewable energy sectors, through the Programmation Pluriannuelle de l'Énergie. The offshore wind sector presents a great opportunity to increase overall renewable energy capacity, thanks to the long French coastline and favourable weather conditions. The target set so far by the PPE for offshore wind is 2.4 gigawatts in 2023 and around 5 gigawatts in 2028 from a current non-existent capacity for the sector. Round 1 and 2 of the call for tenders have awarded projects, but they still haven't started nearly 10 years after the call for tenders as a result of lengthy legal and administrative procedures. Round 3 has just happened, and the 600 megawatt Dunkirk project was attributed to the consortium composed of EDF, Innogy and Enbridge. So what does that mean for French offshore wind? Over the next 45 minutes, we will cover the following questions. Where does the opportunity lie in terms of offshore wind on the French territories? What are the barriers to uptake in the sector? How can the sector finally take off? What does Dunkirk mean for French offshore wind? And what is the potential of floating offshore wind? I feel extremely privileged to welcome an industry expert this afternoon to address this topic. I give a warm welcome to Mathieu Monnier, who is Head of Industry, Offshore, Technical Works and Territories at the French Wind Energy Association or FEE. Mathieu Monnier currently supports the development of the wind industry and the energy transition in France. He has the experience of public affairs, intercultural management, especially with Germany and other European countries, and strategy. He strongly believes in the decentralization and the digitalization of the energy sector. His daily work contributes to the fight against global warming and sustainable growth of local jobs in France. Mathieu Monnier will be starting by presenting his views on the industry, following which we will take questions from our listeners. You can submit your questions using the question box on the GoToWebinar bar to the right of your screen. Please don't be shy. We will try and get through as many relevant questions as possible in our time frame. And with that, I shall now hand over to our speaker, Mathieu Monnier. The floor is yours, Mathieu.
Thank you very much, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to participate in this webinar dedicated to French offshore wind, which is quite a complicated topic, even for me sometimes. But I'm pleased to give you a few elements on the context in order to give you keys to understand the sector in France. So next slide, please, Megan. So as Megan said, I work at the French Wind Energy Association, which is a trade association entirely dedicated to wind energy in France, on both onshore and offshore wind. Concerning offshore wind, we work on bottom fixed and also on floating offshore wind. So this is the next slide. The association gathers more than 300 companies, French and European companies, and we represent nearly 90% of the actors involved in the industry in France. The wind industry represents more than 17,000 jobs in the country, direct and indirect, and we have nearly 2,000 jobs dedicated to offshore wind, even if we have no wind farm, offshore wind farm in operation yet. Next slide, please. So, concerning the context, in order to give you some elements, at the moment, this is the energy transition law that that gives the rules in order on the different objectives. The main objective of this law is 32% of renewables in the energy mix by 2030. One other indicative objective is 40% of renewables in the electricity mix by 2030. At the moment, we have nearly 20% of renewables. Hydroelectricity represents nearly 11%, and to give you a comparison, wind energy represents nearly 6% of electricity mix in France. Indeed, Megan mentioned the Programmation Pluriannuelle de l'énergie, the PPE, which is a multi-year energy plan set up by the Energy Transition Law that gives you the different volumes, the objectives for each energy on 5-year periods. At the moment, we are revising this PPE, and we are discussing the objectives for each energy, and 2 sectors were particularly, let's say, discussed by the politicians and especially the government, the offshore wind sector and the biogas sector. The French government announced last month, first the Prime Minister on June the 12th, and then the former Minister for Ecological and Inclusive Transition, the intention to increase the tenders volumes for offshore wind to 1 gigawatt awarded per year, which is a progress, but we expect more details and precision on the calendar, the volumes, and let's say the areas where we could deploy these new gigawatts. Next slide, please. So, concerning the technical potential of offshore wind in France, you may hear regularly that France has the second potential of for offshore wind in France, in Europe. So, according to our National Environment Agency, the French technical potential is nearly 92 gigawatts for bottom fixed, and mainly in the channel, a little bit in the North Sea with Dunkirk, and also in the Atlantic. Concerning floating offshore wind, the potential is more important because of the possibilities to operate in larger areas. As you see, the yellow color is for deeper bathymetry, and on the contrary, the dark green is for a shorter bathymetry. So we consider that we can deploy bottom fixed for bathymetry from 8 to 70 meters, and floating offshore wind from 30 meters to more than 200 meters. So the potential, the technical potential is quite clear in France, and we just ask for developing it. Next slide, please. So this is, let's say, a state-of-the-art of the capacity to be installed in France. As Megan said, we had 2 past tenders awarded for a global accumulative capacity of 3 gigawatts. They were awarded in 2012 and 2014. We had to face important delays for 2 reasons. The first reason is that, let's say, the regulatory framework was not so well designed in order to welcome offshore wind capacities with some particularities. And the second reason is due to legal recourses with opponents to wind industry generally. So the first commissionings should take place by from 2020-2021, and we may have a complete commissioning in 2022, but this has to be confirmed by EDF Renewables with the Saint-Nazaire project in the Atlantic. That could be the first project commissioned in France. Also, we had the award of the 3rd tender in France, with, which is the Dunkirk tender, with, let's say, an estimative capacity of 600 megawatts. This has to be clearly defined in the next years with the envelope permit system that gives the operators the possibility to adapt the project to increase or reduce the number of wind turbines. And the commissioning is expected, let's say, for 2026. A 4th tender is coming. It is planned to take place off the Normandy, and concerning the zoning, we will have a public debate from October this year until February 2020, so next year. So we had really positive regulatory improvements. First of all, the TSO is now in charge of grid connection since the end of 2018. Both for construction and operation, and also all the risks are defined and covered by the transport electricity tariff. So the consumer of electricity pays for this, and the TSO has more possibility to standardize all the installations, electrical substation, and to be maybe more effective for grid connection. This is quite the opposite if I compare to the UK, but we chose this new model. The ESSOC law, loi sur la société de confiance, also define new measures for offshore wind, a public participation before the tender procedure in order to select let's say, the best area for the project. Second, the envelope permits, the Rockdale envelope principle that you perfectly know, for more flexibility in the choice of technologies, and then a de-risking process in order to inject data in the competitive dialogue. This is the same system as in Germany, and also but less advanced than in Denmark or in the Netherlands. So it gives more transparency and it boosts the competitiveness and the concurrence between all the actors. Next slide, please. But we still have work actually in France. We can accelerate the treatment of legal issues and recourses in France, and this is, let's say, a forecast for the first tenders. We should have 10 years between the award and the commissioning of the project. So this is huge. This is maybe twice or third times more than in other European countries, and this is not acceptable. And the members of the parliament are working on a new energy and climate law at the moment, and we should have the Conseil d'État, the highest administrative court, to judge directly the cases for offshore wind. This would be a great measure in order to gain more, to spare time. We can also simplify some mechanism. This is the same slide. Tender procedure, tax policy, sea work law, etc. Of course, the state has to give more visibility and volumes in order to ensure a safe development of offshore wind. Also, support of French companies investing in the sector could be a good solution, and also we as an industry can facilitate partnerships on strategic markets with our colleagues in Europe and abroad. Next slide. So, what does the Dunkirk tender mean? So first of all, this is an excellent signal to the government. As Megan said, the EMF consortium was awarded. The French energy regulator gave us the tariff for this tender, so 44 euros per megawatt hour for 20 years. So this is quite a record in Europe if we accept the zero subsidy project, because the last reference was the Kriegers Flak project in Denmark with 90.9 euros per megawatt hour for 50,000 full load for all the projects. So this is a very good result. The different candidates bet on new technologies. They propose to use 12 or 13 megawatts wind turbines. So this is, let's say, a bet on technology for the future. But this is realistic if we consider some announcements with GE, Allied X, and other, let's say, technology developments, ongoing technology developments. This tender also means that the state could earn money with this project, as it is said by the regulator. The main lesson is probably that such a performance is now possible in France, and it gives more possibilities for additional capacities in the future. Of course, because the state will have more trust in this technology and will use the price in order to give us more volumes. We have to keep in mind that in France the electricity mix is already decarbonized, the majority, more than 90%, and also due to nuclear energy. So we have a strong concurrence with nuclear energy, and the main competitor of nuclear energy in France is offshore wind, actually. The concurrence for the Dunkirk tender was high. We had 11 candidates pre-selected, and 8 consortiums decided to make an offer. So the French market attracts a lot. And as I said previously, the multi-year energy plan can be the opportunity to reach ambitious targets for the country, and let's say, targets that are similar to maybe Germany or even the UK in a few years. So that could be very interesting, considering the potential. Next slide, please. In conclusion, offshore wind is a great opportunity to boost, let's say, a blue and a green growth on the French territory. We expect 15,000 jobs by 2030, also with the first gigawatts and the next to come. Of course, we had serious difficulties, but we think that the sector will finally take off, especially with the first commissioning, and also because of the great reforms for offshore wind development and all the measures we obtain in the laws and in the decrees. Finally, the government and the parliament decided to support the industry, and I think that let's say the market signal with Dunkirk will confirm this ambition of France. A lot of French actors have know-how and competencies to succeed. They already export and they are active in the sector. Also, we have to remind that maritime economy in France is quite important, more than 70 billion euros yearly. So offshore wind is let's say, a subsector of maritime economy. France can be seen as a promising market, and we have positive signals. So that also shows a great appetite for competitive and mature technology. There is still work to improve the framework, and the public policy is on a good way, actually. So,
great. So thank you very much, Mathieu, for this very insightful presentation. We will now go on to the questions from our listeners. We've received some interesting questions, so thank you very much for your interest and involvement. So to start with, one question that we've had is around storage and kind of what does the wind renewable energy industry plan for storage?
So concerning storage, this is a topic of discussions in France as well. The regulator is considering it at the moment, but it wants to make sure that the owners of storage capacities will be not necessarily the TSO, because you can have an influence on the market with storage capacities. From a technological point of view, I've heard that a lot of offshore wind actors have great interest for storage and hydrogen as well, maybe also hydrogen production on site. So I would say that storage is a great topic. For wind energy, we have several pilot projects, not yet for offshore wind, but for onshore wind, we already have some examples of developments and hybrid projects. So I think that's in the next months and years, storage will remain attractive and an opportunity to make business.
Okay, great. We've actually had a follow-up question on storage. Is green ammonia on the radar as a storage solution in France?
Please, can you repeat me again? I haven't heard.
Is green ammonia on the radar as a storage solution in France?
This is a good question, but I do not have an answer now. So if you accept it, I will answer later, and I will ask my competent colleague on it.
Okay, no problem. We'll be able to follow up with that. So another question that's very topical at the moment, do you think the change of minister will have an impact on the sector?
Actually, you know, political context has always an impact on policies, but the let's say the former minister was a big ally of offshore winds in France. He also supported us to make sure that the government increase the volumes for offshore wind in the PPE. So, but the new minister, Mrs. Borne, is the former director of cabinet of Ségolène Royal, who was already very active on offshore wind, and we do not think that the government will be less ambitious because you have a context of on offshore wind in France. The result of the Dunkirk tender was had a massive impact, and we do not think that offshore wind is in danger for the PPE and the next steps. So, of course, this has, let's say, a small impact in the next weeks before the summer holidays, but everything will be good in the end. I think so.
Okay, great. So another question we've had is, you mentioned 90% of LA is coming from nuclear. What is the phase-out timing of these to allow wind and others to penetrate the grid further?
So I did not mention 90% for nuclear, but 90% for CO2-free electricity production. Actually, nuclear energy is at nearly 75%. And the new energy laws will set up an objective at 50% of nuclear electricity in the electricity mix by 2035. So actually 25% of electricity mix have to be replaced by a strong growth of renewables. And the Prime Minister mentioned the importance of offshore wind in this share, actually. So it gives the renewables the opportunity to grow and also to replace nuclear energy in the next years. And the horizon is 2035.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying. We've had a couple of questions around the kind of scope for international EU, European original companies to participate. Is there a lot of room for them to kind of join as an EPC or technology supply?
Yes, I think that all the companies interested in developing activities in France are welcome on the market. You just have to see the list of our members. They come from all Europe, and they are active in several markets. So I think that the more concurrence there is, and the more the results will be positive in terms of price, and also maybe in terms of innovation and value creation on the territory. So there is place, but there is some space, but you have to be competitive and also to make partnerships with French companies. I think that let's say the local content criteria as in the UK interests the French government a lot, actually.
Okay, that's interesting. Another question we've had is, how do the objectives of the energy transition law relate to the ARENH tariff? So
concerning the energy transition law, let's say that the objectives in terms of LCOE and price reduction are defined in the PPE, in the multi-year energy plan. So actually the French government gives some expectations for the different tenders, and it follows, let's say, a reduction curve during the period of the PPE. So if you look at the PPE project, for the fourth tender, for instance, the expected price from the government is 65 euros per megawatt hour, but we already reached 44 euros per megawatt hour with Dunkirk. So of course the state has some expectations, but we do not have clear objective by 2030 or 2035. The state calculates, let's say, the amount of subsidies. You have an envelope, and then you use it for during all the period. So this is the way it goes.
Okay, great. And is the electrical infrastructure on land able to cope with an influx of offshore wind electricity? So what about public resistance in that area, such as Belgium? Another question we had.
So your question is about interconnection, or the ability for the TSO to connect the different projects?
Latter.
Sorry?
The latter.
Okay. So RTE is a French TSO in charge of grid connection, and the TSO has already, let's say, a great experience for marine connection, with interconnections with the UK, in a few months and years with Ireland, and concerning the will to develop a network with Belgium. This is not clear yet, but I think that France is involved in the intergovernmental panel for offshore wind, which connects all the countries involved in offshore wind for the North Seas, and grid connection is also a topic, and the TSO intends to invest a lot in offshore wind grid connection. So maybe Elia and RTE will develop some common projects, but at the moment this is not clear yet.
Okay, thanks. Another question we've had is, will there be a specific contribution coefficient for offshore wind for the capacity market certified capacity level, or will it be calculated with a unique with wind onshore?
Let's say that the production of offshore wind farms will be injected on the market, and with the principle of direct marketing. So I don't think that we will have some PPAs, for instance. The regulation in France is quite clear for CFD. You have a contract with the main operator, EDF OA, and for 20 years, and then you are not the owner of the guarantees of origin, because the state owns it and sells them on the market. You can acquire them, but you have to pay for it, because in France you have no compatibility between, let's say, a CFD given by the state and the ownership of guarantees of origin. So the offshore wind production will be directly marketed and with no specific, let's say, contract for offshore wind or also.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. And where are we with round 1 and 2 projects? And then kind of what is the impact of important delays on the project?
So concerning round 1, you may have heard that Saint-Nazaire project has won at Conseil d'État, so the recourse against the project. So now the project has all the authorization cleared, and the FID can be taken in the next weeks. So we hope that it will be the case soon. And it should be commissioned by 2021-2022. And this is the same situation for the 3 other projects of round 1. Saint-Brieuc, Fécamp, and Courseulles. We should have a judgment in the next days, actually. Concerning round 2, the project had the authorizations last year, all the permits, and they were attacked, so there are recourses. And if we consider that 3 years are needed for to clear all the claims and the issues, they should be commissioned in 2023, 2024, actually. And the commissioning date for Dunkirk is expected is 2026.
Okay, excellent. We did have a question whilst you were still doing your presentation. Would you be able to clarify what the CFD principle is?
Yeah, so contract for difference. It means that when you win a tender, you have a tariff for 20 years. For instance, for Dunkirk, this is 44 euros per megawatt hour. If the market price, the wholesale price, electricity price is, let's say, 50 euros, it means that you have to give the difference between 44 and 50 to the state. If the market is at, I don't know, 35, the state will subsidy the difference between 35 and 44. So it gives the possibility for an operator to have a visibility for 20 years on the revenues, and also it gives the state the possibility to earn money and to minimize the amount of subsidy. So the CFD is as a contract for the revenue of resulting of electricity production, and we think that this is maybe the best tool for offshore wind, even if some countries decided to bet on zero subsidy system, because in terms of bankability and financing, it is much better to have a CFD and a visibility on 20 years.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Going to floating winds now, one question we had is whether there's been much resistance or whether you anticipate there to be much resistance from fishermen, marine, transport sector, ecologists, such as risks against big marine life, for example, and how is kind of France dealing with local opposition?
I would say that resistance to projects and infrastructures in France is a national sport and specialty. But apart from that, I would say that floating wind is an opportunity to install capacities far from the coast, and it will reduce, let's say, the problems of visibility from the coast. Indeed, after, I don't know, more than 25 or 30 kilometers from the coast, you have nearly no visibility. So this is maybe a good point for this. But for other users of, let's say, the seas, concerning transport and activities and other commercial vessels, there is no big problem, because we select areas where it is possible to deploy the capacities. That means areas where you have no big routes in terms of maritime transport. So for this, there is no problem. Plus, you also have safety distances between the wind farm and the transport routes. So no problem for this. Concerning the fishermen, of course, they see the technology as a more restrictive area, because you have cables and anchors, and for some fishermen activities, this will be not possible. But once again, you also have in Europe the directive for maritime spatial planning, plus a new way to select the areas for offshore wind in France, with a public debate and the participation of fishermen, etc. So we will select the zones that are less impacting for the fishermen as well. Plus, we have also a tax on offshore wind capacities with support for the fishermen. So plus compensations, financial compensations from the consortium directly to the fishermen. Concerning the ecologist associations, they see floating offshore wind as a less impactant technology, because the foundation is anchored in the seabed. So this is maybe better for the marine life generally. And concerning bird collision, this is the same debate as for bottom fixed offshore wind. So we just have to select areas that are less sensitive in terms of birds migration and birds routes, I would say.
Okay, great. So we've got time for just one more quick question, and then we'll draw to a close. One final question then. Are there wind farms expected in the Côte d'Azur?
Are the wind farm expected for what?
In the Côte d'Azur.
Côte d'Azur. So I see that some of you are worried about holidays, maybe. Actually, as I know, no, the French Riviera is not concerned by offshore wind deployment, because in the Mediterranean Sea, the most interesting resources in terms of wind are to the west of the Mediterranean. That is to say, Gulf of the Lion, and you also have you will have an interesting area of Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, but to the west of the region. that is to say in front of the, let's say, the Marseille-Fos port, and not in front of Nice or Monaco or other cities of the Côte d'Azur. No worries.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying and answering all of those questions, and more generally for all of your insights that you've shared on the French renewables market today. Thank you as well to all of our listeners for your participation and questions. The recording will be sent out over the next week. In the meantime, if you have any questions, or if there were any questions that you sent in that I wasn't able to read out today, please email us and we can pass these questions on to Mathieu to provide answers and more insights. You can email me directly at megan.farbroder, my surname spelled F-A-R-B-R-O-T-H-E-R, at greenpowerglobal.com. That's all for now. Thank you again to everyone and to Mathieu. Keep in touch.
Thank you. Bye-bye.